Take a roll call.
Yeah.
Do you need to take the attendance? Okay, so, Mayor Visser is not in attendance tonight, so I'll be running the meeting. And, we'll call the meeting to order at 6:31 PM. And we'll start with, the Pledge of Allegiance, actually.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll start with the roll call. Jim King,
Present.
Trevor Jersey,
Present.
EJ Bell,
Present.
Samantha Peterson, present, and David Fisher is absent. Do we need to approve the agenda? No. Okay, so we can just dive right into the work session with Maggie Berger. Thank you for coming.
That sounds great, everyone. Maggie Berger with Spear Financial. We talked a lot before. I said I had to look at the agenda tonight and make sure it's coming to City Hall, because I think my last couple of meetings have been at your makeshift fire station. Happy to be here. Want to talk a little bit. We're going to do a little TIF 101. I know there are some questions about tax increment financing. So I'm going to do a 101, and that's on the handout that I provided to you tonight. So we'll kind of walk through some of my slides. You can ask any questions. We give this TIF 101. I typically give it 6 to 7 times a year to different councils who are looking for information and don't know anything about TIF, or don't, maybe they're new council members, they just don't have a knowledge. And to be very honest, everyone, I think, in the state says, sure, I've heard the term TIF, but not everybody understands what it means, what it entails, how you get there, things like that. And then we have included in your packet for this evening, Sandy included the bonding schedules. We are including for you a 3.7 and a $3.5 million schedule. Those are a little bit smaller schedules than we've been looking at, and I think that is based on your decision to ask architects to go back and do some reconfiguration for size, overall size of the project, maybe bringing your borrowing down, because I remember and remind everybody that, we still have those FEMA dollars, we still have the insurance dollars, so your borrowing comes net of that amount from the total size. So please stop me and ask questions as we go, but we are going to start with this TIF 101 sheet here in front of you. Just want to do a little terms and definition. Tax abatement, so there's a lot of discrepancy when we talk about TIF versus abatement. People kind of think that they're the same thing. They are not the same thing. Unfortunately, the code section calls one urban revitalization, which is tax abatement, and one urban renewal. I mean, we couldn't just it's UR and UR. So everyone confuses it. So let's talk a little bit through that. When you have a tax abatement program in your community, there's no taxable valuation recognized on the county tax rolls, or there's some sort of diminished taxable valuation. So what that means is county assessor comes out, they assess your property, but then when it rolls back into the county to be taxed upon, the county assessor, because of an agreement that you have in place that says, your commercial business is not going to have any assessment on it for the next 5 years, there's no assessment that's recognized. So when you're online looking at those GIS or the beacon and real estate mapping and valuations, there's just no value there, or there's limited value compared to really what there should be. So that's really what tax abatement is. You can use tax abatement for housing, you can use it for commercial and industrial. The biggest change to tax abatement recently was House File 718, which got passed over a year ago. As of this July 1st of 2024, it now removes school districts from the abatement process altogether. So where a city could say, commercial building, we're going to give you 3 years, 100% abatement, meaning you're not going to pay a tax bill for the first 3 years that your valuation is on the tax rolls. That can't happen anymore. Now we can abate your taxes for the city and the county and the community college, but we can't abate your taxes for the school district. You will still pay the school district taxes. That was a deal that was sort of worked out in House File 718. So So that's really urban revitalization, is just that there's no taxes paid or there's a reduced amount of taxes paid.
Now,
Mhm.
so the city can literally stop them from paying county taxes.
You can stop a new development or something, yes,
Under the abatement. If we
Correct.
abate, then the county.
correct. You have to have an abatement.
That surprises me. I mean, I can see where we could abate the city portion of it, but we get to take the county also.
County and community college.
Thank you.
And there has to be an abatement program put into place
Right.
before they can even break ground. So that's the biggest difference between TIF and and urban revitalization. The urban revitalization abatement, it has to be done, and it's about a 90 to 100-day process, start to finish, to set up an urban revitalization plan. And that has to be done. We have a city who did a housing years ago, and one house was just itching to get started, and we couldn't offer them abatement because they broke ground in January and the plan didn't get approved until March. And they knew that, they were okay with it, but they, I think, had sold their home and were needing to get out of a home, and so there was just not that possibility there. Tax increment financing, or TIF, which is commonly called urban renewal, it means that there's new taxable valuation that's going to be recognized on the county tax rolls, and it's an amount above the existing base valuation is considered the increment. So tax increment financing. The increment then can be drawn upon by a city for an obligation, which could be a bond, a loan, a rebate agreement, or some kind of interfund loan. We'll talk a little bit about what the process is to make that happen. But honestly, this is the easiest way that John Danos and Spear have always explained this. This table is base value. This is here, it's bare land, it's been there, it's here. This is TIF. That water bottle right there is TIF. I have built something, it has produced a new taxable valuation, and the city can collect the majority of those taxes off of this water bottle. Where in a normal situation, a third of the taxes go to the city, a third of the taxes go to the county, and a third of the taxes go to the school district. When you have new valuation like this, you, the city, get to collect about 2/3 of the taxes or even more for a certain number of years if you have an obligation against that TIF area. So again, base value, everybody gets their base value taxes, right? There's still land. The land is still there, and everybody gets their division of the base value. We also get comments a lot that I live in a TIF district, I pay more in taxes. You do not pay more in taxes if you live in a TIF district. It's likely that when your taxes get to the county, they may be divided up differently. But if I have a $100,000 house here and Sandy has a $100,000 house 4 blocks over and does not live in a TIF district, we're paying the same amount of taxes because our homes are valued at the same value. We're paying the same, it's just when we go, our taxes go into the county, they may be divided differently. Tax rebate is also something we want to talk a little bit about under urban renewal. So a tax rebate means you've entered into an agreement with a developer, whether that's housing, commercial, industrial, and that developer is going to build something, they're going to create new increment, and you are going to rebate back a portion or all of those new taxes for a set number of years and up to a set dollar amount. So that's really, we hear a lot about, well, we're going to do a TIF rebate. That's what that means. That is not money up front to a developer. That is not you giving them anything up front. That's not you paying for any infrastructure or anything like that. That's you saying once there's new valuation and those taxes get paid by that new valuation, you're going to rebate back some, all, whatever you have to on that. So we can talk a little bit more about rebates as we go. With regards to housing, so there's this code section requires that any urban renewal that is for housing requires low to moderate income set aside, LMI as it's commonly referred to. The LMI rate for Benton County is 37.51%. That LMI rate leaves you, roughly 63% availability for you to rebate on. So really what that means is the code section says you cannot incentivize a developer to build houses in your community and give them 100% of the TIF receipts. Can't do it because there are people out there that can't afford market rate housing, can't afford $350,000, $400,000 houses. And you can't just incentivize a population of people that has the money and the means to do that. You must also set aside money and focus on the lower income needs of your community, whether that is individual grants to people, whether that is doing a project in an area of your town where you've deemed through an income survey that 75% of that street has, it meets the low to moderate income standards by HUD, which is about 80% of the median income. If that is the case, you could pay for 75% of that project with your LMI funds that you set aside. Simply the easiest way to think about this is if you do some sort of a rebate, you do some housing incentive, you're going to collect the TIF dollars, and for every TIF dollar that comes in, you're going to divide that and you're going to put 37.51% in the LMI fund, and the other 62.49% is what you're going to be able to give back to the developer. So developer, we say they're getting 100%, but they're only getting 100% of their eligible receipts, that are eligible to be received back to them. So that's just a little bit about some terms and definitions as we go. The timeline on the second page at the top. Yeah.
On that LMI, what if the housing development is specifically set up for low income?
If the housing development, then there is no LMI requirement. But those people have to be income surveyed. Houses have to be at a certain dollar level. There's some HUD restrictions.
We've got 3 of them going right now. I just wanted to get that.
Yeah, so there's no if you're offering some sort of TIF incentive, right? Doesn't apply to anything else, only when you're offering a TIF incentive. But if you're doing a low income housing, there's no LMI set aside.
So
if there's an
LMI, 100%, and that's what
you would be able to be 100% as in a TIF receipt, in a TIF rebate in that situation, right? There's some, we'll say steps. I don't want to say hoops because they're not hoops. They're just steps you have to take to prove up that it's meeting the standards of what's considered to be low to moderate income housing. A little bit of a timeline. 1969 is when we implemented TIF law, and it was mainly for blighted areas. And blighted areas also do not have LMI requirements. You can even deem an area blight now. We see a lot of blighted areas, like you go in and you take down an old factory, you take down an old fueling station, and there's tanks that have to be removed, and you're like you're remediating the blight. You're like trying to eliminate this blighted area. We have people ask all the time, well, are farm fields in Iowa blight? No. Bond Council will absolutely say no. They have a lot of value in that they're not blighted areas, but if you're trying to get rid of something in your community that is an eyesore, something like that, you can take it and make it a blight TIF area, which again, no LMI, things like that. 1985, it was expanded from just blighted areas to include economic development purposes as well. I think this was partially due to our farm crisis in the mid 80s, that they were saying we want to be able to give incentive to incentivize economic development businesses coming to communities. We want to diversify our economy here in the state of Iowa. 1995, they added time restrictions. We'll talk about those sunset dates on the very next slide. And so that just means that if any of your agreements were set up after 1995, they have time restrictions on them. And then 2012 were the most significant changes that we've seen in the TIF law in recent years. And we have a slide, I believe, on the 2012 TIF, but those changes were the most significant. TIF is a tool that really only you as a city living in a city can provide. It's up to you as a city to incentivize development in your community, right? The school district can't incentivize, the county can't come within the city limits and incentivize that unless there is an industrial property, and then they can come in and help out just because of their bonding authority and things like that. But it's really up to you to make that development happen. Whether or not you use TIF or not, TIF is a tool that gives you the opportunity to make that help, to offer help or incentives to make that happen. Again, we see it very commonly used on commercial, industrial, as well as housing and blighted areas. So one example, a good example we have of a blighted community, we have a community that had a lot of flooding, and it came from this one stream. So they built kind of I don't want to call it a berm, but they built kind of up and around it. Well, some of the other area on the other side that had always flooded, which now is not going to flood, really was blighted area, because this is area, and it was some farm area, but it was area that really you could never build on because it was always in a floodplain. And as they kind of removed it from the floodplain, it was blighted, and they were incentivizing housing to come in there. And they did not have to do the LMI because this was not an area that they could have ever had housing. And now, the DNR was saying, sure, yep, we've removed it from the floodplain and you can do that there. So just something to think about. The TIF sunset laws here on the next slide. TIF districts that were set up prior to 1995, they don't have a sunset law. So you will hear some opponents to TIF will say, well, that's one of those pre-95 ones, and they just keep tipping and keep tipping and keep collecting. That's everyone's decision choices.
And the city of Atkins has.
You do. You do have one. So, which I live in the city of Waterloo, or I work in the city of Waterloo, and we have like 3 out of like 6 that are prior to 1995, and the others are after 1995. If a TIF district was established after 1995, commercial and industrial districts have a 20-year sunset date, and residential and multi-residential have a 10-year sunset date. So that just means you can only TIF an area for 10 years. Now, we get that question asked all the time, well, can you re-TIF an area? Absolutely, you can. But at the end of that 20-year or that 10-year timeline, whatever the sunset is, you re-TIF it at whatever this now is our base value. So it's now over and above. Like, this was our base value. We built all of these little water bottles. Now, sitting on top of the water bottles is our base value, because maybe there's going to be more growth. Maybe there were 2 or 3 empty lots, and there's a gas station and something else going to go on those lots. You can re-TIF the exact same area and set up a new time frame, but there's got to be able to be growth of new increment over and above now. What is there in
But
today's
your dollars are gonna be different.
Mhm.
Because you're starting.
Correct.
out, so,
Yeah,
And
so
generally,
correct.
it's a smaller area, so
Correct.
you're gonna have considerably less
Yep.
money to work with.
Yeah. And where we see a re-TIF a lot of times is in 2012, the tax law, the TIF laws changed. Where we see a re-TIFing was that in 1995, 1997, 2000, you set up a TIF area and nothing ever happened. And for some reason, the timeline on it started and 20 years went by and nothing ever happened. So we say, well, we're going to extinguish this TIF area and then restart it, because really, there wasn't a whole lot of growth. We'll take whatever growth, just a natural appreciation of the land value, and we'll start there. And now we have growth areas. It was forward thinking by communities to set areas aside in the TIF area, but we've really honed in the last 10 years on only setting aside areas now that really have the development coming. Like, you're specifically talking about a specific area that you're going to develop or have developed. Again, if the area is deemed blight, you do not have a sunset date. How TIF works, a little bit, just going back to this, it's based on the incremental value. So the base lot the base lot value is $10,000, but in 3 years it's $300,000. That just means you have increment of $290,000. I mean, it's just simple math. And it's based on the TIF tax rate and not the actual tax rate. So at the bottom, I was explaining before I got here, we printed these off today, and then Eddie walks over to me and goes, I don't think I updated the Atkins tax rate. And I was like, nope, you didn't. Because he was working today on getting the tax rate in for fiscal year 25, because Ted at the DOM gave it to us on Monday. So this extra handout here, this is your total TIF tax rate. So as you can see at the top, $31.33 is the combined tax rate that you will pay this fall on your tax bill. And that goes to city, county, school, community college, right? But in the TIF law, it says you can't use that tax rate. You can't rebate back or collect money on $31. You can only collect on the TIF tax rate, which eliminates these levies. It eliminates the city's debt service levy, so you can't collect any money off of the value for the debt service levy. You can't collect off the county's debt service levy, the community college's debt service levy, the school debt service levy, which is 0 here. That means there's no GO voted bonds that they're collecting property taxes on. School Pebble and school instructional. So those levies have to come off. So where somebody pays in on $31 a thousand, The most you'll ever collect back of those TIF receipts or those dollars is at $26.57 for the fiscal year 25.
And just to be clear, when you say the top one says total combined city tax rate, that isn't city, it means.
City, county, school, that's the total tax rate that
I
will
want
show
everybody
up.
here to think
It
that
will
the
show up
city of
on your
Atkins
fall tax bill.
applied 31 cents.
Correct,
That's not
no.
our tax rate,
No.
that's the combined
It's the
for
combined
of all the taxing entities.
all taxing entities that will get billed out by Benton County this fall. First bill will be due by the end of September. So again, that's where I said you get about 2/3 of TIF if you want it for your obligation, but then there's gonna be this money that you can't touch, these dollars that you cannot touch, and that just means that growth. So the easiest way to try to explain that is, and Sandy's gonna show this to you after I discuss this tonight. I'm gonna give her some homework here. She's gonna pull out your fiscal year 25 budget, and she's gonna show you at the very top that you have a valuation to levy against the $8.10 or wherever that levy came in for you. Then she's gonna show you the valuation that you have against your debt service levy. And that valuation against your debt service levy is going to be significantly higher than the valuation against your 810. Because we've now taken part of the 810 off of the new growth and collected it for TIF receipts. But we can't take your debt service levy valuation. So we can't reduce that. So that just means that if I levy $1 in the general fund and I have TIF, and I levy $1 in the debt service fund, I will collect more on my $1 tax levy in the debt service than I will in the general fund, because there's more valuation in the debt service levy than there is in the general fund. That makes sense? I think the way we also talk about TIF is, remember, TIF is you have to create the valuation increase, and you're borrowing, I like to say the word borrowing, that valuation increase for a set number of years to incentivize whatever development's going on or whatever you need those dollars for. When you're done borrowing those TIF receipts, then that money can flow back into the general fund of the city, the county, the school district, community college, things like that. So you're the one borrowing really those dollars to make development happen. How urban renewal works on the next page, you have to adopt an urban renewal plan. It gets prepared by either your bond council or like your COG. Sometimes can prepare those plans. There's a plan that gets prepared. You certify that plan or you approve that plan through a public hearing process, and it outlines, that plan will outline the projects and the type of obligation you're going to enter into. Are you entering into a bond issue? Are you entering into a rebate agreement, an interfund loan? What are you doing? Once you've completed that public hearing, you have to have a consultation with the school district and the county of that meeting. You have to just call them and say, hey, we're gonna have some urban renewal projects, and you're invited to come. It's not a council meeting. It's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because you need to make it feasible as to when they're in their business hours. 10 a.m., 2 p.m., no one ever shows up. I recall you did an urban renewal plan amendment for part of this fire station potential borrowing, and no one showed up because I said I would be on call. They could call me at the office and I could explain it to the county and the school district. If anyone shows up, they didn't show up. But I will say this, they're educated people. They know how to read an urban renewal plan. They've seen them before, so they're looking at it and saying, okay, yep, we understand what's going on. They'd show up if they had questions about what was being discussed and stuff. So House File 2460 in April of 2012, as I mentioned before, was one of the largest changes that we had seen to TIF in many, many years. TIF is always on the chopping block. A lot of people hate TIF, but there's a whole lot of people that love TIF as well. I am a person who believes in TIF if TIF is used the way that TIF is intended to be used. I think it is the best way, and I think if TIF went away, we'd be in a much dire state in the state of Iowa than we are right now with TIF. But that's my 2 cents on it.
We wouldn't have Coralville or North Liberty, either one without TIF.
So the reason that TIF gets a bad name is there's misuses, right? There's always somebody who makes a headline, makes a news article, and about a misuse of TIF or something like that. So that's how it kind of comes about. In that House file from 2012, Iowa counties now must file an annual report. Cities and counties must file an annual report. I'm sure Sandy is so looking forward to filing this report this December, but really what that report says is in the prior fiscal year, so 2024, what did you take in TIF receipts and how did you spend those TIF receipts? It's as simple as that. It's a bothersome, and we keep talking to Ted about it, telling it's not our favorite form to fill out, but really it's just a tracking. It was told to us in 2012. The reason they wanted that is the state was going to come out with a whole bunch of spreadsheets and tell you how people were using TIF. That's 12 years later, and we've never seen that spreadsheet, so whatever. Just keep filling out the things. Public buildings being financed with TIF must have a feasibility statement for the reason of using TIF. There was a feasibility statement done, why you would be using TIF dollars, potentially on a fire station. And, so that feasibility was part of John Danos's directions. He knew he had to do that feasibility with you guys and the prior council or the council members at that time. It was all part of the public hearing and stuff. Urban renewal plans are required to be updated for every project. So anything you're going to add and TIF on, you've got to amend the urban renewal plan. And then there's an anti-piracy law. So I apologize to anybody who's in the audience that may live in Coralville, but anti-piracy in 2012 comes because of one reason. We call it the Von Mauer Law. The city of Iowa City had Von Mauer in their downtown mall. The city of Coralville came to Von Mauer and said, we will give you $10 million if you move to Coralville and we will help you build a building. And Von Mauer said, sure. And they left downtown, leaving a big empty hole in a mall, and went to Coralville. And that happened in the fall of 2011. And in the spring of 2012, there were a fair amount of legislators that felt that was not a good practice. You cannot be pirating businesses from other communities without that other community's permission, which Iowa City would have never signed off on. So the anti-piracy bill, we really totally refer to it as the Von Mauer bill. We have worked with a lot of communities, and there are not a lot of communities that are going to sign off on a business leaving their community to go to your community, and you're going to give them a TIF incentive. In the 12 years, I don't know that we've had one that has been successful in getting the permission to move out of one community. The school instructional levy is no longer applicable. So that one that we talked about here, school instructional, you can't take that away anymore. You used to be able to utilize that for TIF. You can't utilize that anymore. That was another one. And then community colleges no longer have to be invited to the consultation. Not a big deal, but community colleges have a lot of value. They don't need to, it's not a big deal for them to be invited. TIF also has to do with debt limitation. So you have to remember that, we have this 5% debt limitation. We've talked about this at length before with the city. That's the amount that you can borrow. You're sitting in an okay debt position right now, actually, with the type of debt that you're going to be borrowing. You should be just fine in preserving debt capacity. But any agreements that you enter into, like a rebate agreement, they can count against your debt capacity. So we're very careful to use annual appropriation language in those agreements and things like that. I think your current rebate agreement has an annual appropriation clause, which basically means we only have to count the annual amount of TIF that you're giving them against.
Because it's subject to approval each year.
Subject to approval each year, absolutely. It's annual appropriations.
But that's important for the council to remember.
Correct.
Each year.
Yes. Should
Why?
be, yes, you
Why
should be
it's coming
approving it in your October or your November meeting. It's got to be approved by December 1 because you ask for the money on December 1 for the next fiscal year. So usually you get those annual appropriations, and I'll tell you, there's some resolutions that John has done, and you could just ask him like ClerkSnet and you'd be able to find it, but we've seen a bunch of resolutions where they combine three things. It's the resolution authorizing the annual appropriation of this rebate agreement, approving the annual filing for fiscal year 2024 of TIF to the state, and approving the TIF certification that's going to go to the county for fiscal year 26. So it kind of all gets lumped into one resolution, and that can be helpful. I actually think that's more helpful because it all puts it together and it spells it all out, and it's all what you're doing at one specific time to talk about what happened before, what you're going to do in the future, and that you're going to annually appropriate that future asking.
Keeps everything moving and less confusing too.
It does.
Because it is, those are things that are annual things.
They're all things that have to be done on an annual
we
basis,
can-
right? So,
But if you do it November one year, December another year, you try to push it forward to September, like, it can be difficult for, I think, for maybe council members, especially in the flux of things.
Correct.
To realize this isn't a new decision necessarily, this is us standing by a previous obligation.
right, and December 1 is the deadline for filing TIF. So to ask for TIF receipts for the next year, you have to have them asked for by December 1. So that's why we say put it on your October or your November at the very latest agendas, because you've got to have, and the report to the state is due by December 1. And if you do not turn the report into the state by December 1, TED will hold your tax receipts the next spring. So there is a penalty that if you do not file the TIF receipt, not your TIF tax receipts, he will stop you from getting any tax receipts. So they will put a hold on your tax receipts so that you're not getting any money until that gets filed on a timely basis. You can explain why it was not filed on a timely basis. Yeah, so I would say October. I always like October, early November. And we do have some cities that, for whatever reason, we had, weather occupied their first November meeting, and they called a special meeting towards the end of November, because we had to, I mean, there were things that had to be on. Because your street report is due by December 1, your AFR is due by December 1. There's like 9 things that you're due by December 1. So those
Really ought to
October,
push this into September.
yeah, those October, November meetings are very, very important.
And really, it's all ready as soon as you get your down to your fiscal year, essentially.
Correct.
I mean, you can do it.
What is the earliest we could do that?
Usually the reports, I want to say the street report maybe is not always
We just-
accessible.
I would say we just got all the information like within the last week.
Perfect, great.
So we're July, there'd be no problem with a September even. That's why I was wondering if we could get it out of the way, it
Yeah.
really would make sense to.
It's how much you've done. So here's the other thing. If you have new debt to certify to the TIF district, we might be pushing November.
One of my big concerns, Maggie, in pushing ours early is our staffing. The way we've been maneuvering our staffing and the staffing issues that we've got now. It could be real easy to get into an issue where we can't get all of our work done. We're literally been falling behind every month for several years.
We
When
don't-
you do debt for the.
Correct. If we do debt for the fire station yet this fall, we need to certify that debt to collect TIF. And so we've got to include that, and that's sometimes why those late November meetings pop up, because there's been a late debt issuance, and we've got to get that on there before we certify to the county. So that's just kind of a timing thing. I do have one city who's ready to go because they know they're not going to issue debt, and they're like, I'm going to have all these reports done in September, and we're going to approve them. Great, fantastic. So again, then I just show you the debt certification and reporting. December 1, you're required to report what happened prior. You're also asking for what you're going to collect in TIF receipts. So as Sandy was saying, and this is not on your sheet, but I pulled this today for you. And what Sandy was saying is you've got 4 specific TIF areas within your community, 4 urban renewal areas that have been set up. One is from 1997, so it falls after the 2020, or it falls after the 1995 timeframe. It is still collecting a little TIF, which means there's been newer increments or newer additions to that area through time. There's the one from 1990, does not have a sunset date on it, so it's continuing to collect. You are collecting some money from that. You have one from 2004 that is collecting some money, and you have one from 2021 that is collecting some money as well. You are set to receive in fiscal year 2025 to fulfill your obligations approximately $518,000 in TIF receipts. And those will, Sandy can walk you through on your budget, what you're identifying as projects that will collect TIF dollars. There's some debt I know outstanding. You do have a rebate agreement outstanding. That potentially is collecting TIF dollars, I think in 25 for the first time, maybe 26.
25?
That's for fiscal year 25 that we just entered. That's how much you're collecting is. The approximate number is 518,000 based on what you asked for and what the valuations came in at.
Another question we got asked was, when we look at, well, maybe you want to cover that when you do the actual bond. where those TIF dollars are going today, kind of what you just hit, and then when they come off and how they go.
Yeah.
to understand.
Yep. So it's a good question. So again, we can give a breakdown, and I think we've looked at it before. Those TIF dollars are going to certify your current obligations, and I think I can open it up here. And we can see, let's see here. I think we had your debt in here. Or, let's see here if it pulls this up for me. There we go. So you are paying the 2015A debt with TIF. 100% of the 2015A bond is being paid with TIF. That was a general obligation bond. You are also paying 100% of the 2016A debt with TIF. Those two payments together in 25, that's $240,000 of principal plus interest on there. So, you're probably talking somewhere in the range of $300,000 that you're paying with TIF. So out of that $518,000, that's approximately how many dollars are going towards just those two debts. Now, that's the notes that we have. Those are not issued by us. I'm not sure if you're using TIF on any of your other general obligation debts. We'd have to look at your budget and see. I think you are. I'm pretty sure. And so those are, so as C&E sort of looks at that, your 2025, so this is how, on these worksheets, these ones that are in your council packet, like the 3.5 to 3.7, it doesn't matter. But when we look at that TIF revenue column, first of all, we can't collect any TIF revenue in 2025, the fiscal year that we're in right now, for the fire station project, because you haven't issued the obligation. You have not created the obligation. You have to have an obligation, and that has to be a debt or some kind of a loan, something like that, and we've not issued that for the fire station. So there was nothing we could certify last December of 2023 to collect money in 25. So if the fire station debt issues and sells and we have a loan in place, by December 1 of this year, you will collect TIF. We can certify to the TIF district on December 1 saying in 2026, we want to collect TIF dollars for this fire station. Where we're coming up with those numbers are, you're freeing up, I think there's something else that's dropping off because you're freeing up about $120,000 in TIF receipts in 26, and then about $120,000 in TIF receipts in 27. And then all of a sudden it jumps up, and here's why. The 2015A debt pays off in 26. The 2016 debt pays off in 27. So I just told you, you're using 100% of those receipts, those 100% of those debts are being paid with TIF. Well, when those debts pay off, that frees up those TIF dollars. Here's what I tell people always. Don't let your tax rate go like this, right? Because if you have your tax rate at $11 a thousand one year, and then you let it go to $9 a thousand next year, and you raise it right back up to 11 the year after that. Nobody remembers when it went to $9. They're like, you raised my taxes. And you're like, well, I really didn't raise your taxes from 2 years ago. It was the same rate. So don't let your tax rate go like this, but also don't let your TIF receipts go like this. If you are a city who can afford to continue to collect those TIF receipts and still be able to manage your government like you are, then I think you should collect the TIF receipts at a steady level. So if in 2 years, within 2 years, if you have $300,000 of TIF receipts that you no longer need, that's where we're saying go ahead and collect those TIF receipts, because the fire station project is a project that is eligible to be TIF collected for. It is what we call a community anchor type facility. It will have the ability to have community activity in it. And so really, again, bond council has no problem with it. And a lot of times we see fire stations being deemed as TIF projects. We see swimming pools being deemed as TIF projects, even though they do not collect any TIF receipts themselves, because they don't generate any tax dollars. So that's how we get to that buildup on that red column, is that we say, well, you really can't collect anything in 25. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't have an obligation. But if we have an obligation by this December 1, we can collect the TIF receipts in 2026, collect them in 27, and thereon and so forth. And you, all of a sudden, all this debt drops off, and you can collect, like I said, around this $360,000 to $370,000 amount every year. And if you listen to me, you're collecting 518. So you're still not collecting all of the money, but you're collecting enough to pay a $3.7 million bond issue over 15 years. Okay?
Can I?
Yeah.
Real quick, before you go into the future, maybe. But we did collect a pre-levy in 24 with no debt in place.
That has nothing to do with TIF. Pre-levy is a whole different ball of wax. Pre-levy is your property taxes themselves. TIF is urban renewal. TIF is this. Pre-levy is everything in the city. TIF is this.
That's just money we put in the bank for the loan, separate from anything we do. Real quick question though. You said in order to collect and set this up for next year, we've got to have our bond in place December 1.
There's got to be an obligation in place before December 1.
What is the drop dead for you to get that? Like right now, we're looking at still haven't put the bids out.
Yeah.
But if we get the bids out, when do we have to have that and have those contracts signed in order to give you time to hit that December 1 deadline?
So your Benton County auditor will say that the loan has to be authorized in November, which basically means by mid-November, we've got to authorize a loan, which means we probably have to sell bonds by mid to very late October at the very latest.
So we've got to have those contracts in place by September.
We should have a bid in place. And from our standpoint, you've done the public hearings, right?
Yes.
You have the authorization. From our perspective, our office knows that this is coming. We just have to put together the official statement, which is going to take us a couple of weeks to then distribute out to you guys, which says, this is all the demographic, financial information. Does this all look okay? You guys say yes, and then it gets sent out to potential investors. So really, from our perspective, this could be a 45-day turnaround on a bond issue.
We still got to get those contracts out and signed.
I'm not gonna speak, yeah, that's not
I'm just looking at it from my perspective. If we really want to do this year, we've got to have that stuff done.
If you want to collect TIF receipts.
Otherwise, we're going to be another full year.
Another full year before you can collect TIF receipts. I'm not telling you you can't do the project.
Right.
I'm telling you before you can collect TIF receipts.
Then we're going to have to come up with that year's money from someplace other than TIF.
Correct. The $120,000 that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Trevor, I want to go back to pre-levy, okay? Because that was on my list of things to discuss as well tonight. So the city 2 years ago, when we were budgeting during fiscal year 24's budget, which would have been in the spring of 23, so a year and a half ago now, we thought the fire station would go, right? Like we were prepared saying, hey, by the end of calendar year 23, we think the fire station will build. We need to have a pre-levy in place. Again, we ran all these schedules and said, here's what we think we can, run a first debt service schedule at. And we said $100,000 of principal. We really need to maintain at least $100,000 of principal in a first debt payment and then plus the interest. So in that scenario, we said, we think you should levy $162,763. So you levied $162,763 part of the fiscal year 24 budget.
Which is the principal on that term bond for the first year and the interest on all.
Principal and interest of the first maturity of the 20.
So you don't have to worry about, because you haven't issued
No.
the full bond.
Correct. You're just worrying about what you want to pay from a debt service levy perspective.
Did you say 160?
162,000 is what you levied in 24.
What's the extra amount on top of the 100,000 that?
Interest, 62,000 in interest. You have $100,000 of principal, and depending on when you issued in the year, you've got to make an interest payment. So debt is issued whenever, but every June and December 1, an interest payment is due in the world of property tax dollars.
Yeah, that's how home equity, so that's all the same.
Correct.
Yeah.
But it's why it's payable in December and June is because property tax dollars aren't there August 1st, September 1st. They're not there till about October 15th, right? Like by the time the county divvies them up to you, So that's why you don't make an interest payment till December 1 in the first part of your fiscal year, and you don't make principal and interest payment till June 1 of that fiscal year. You do not make monthly payments in debt obligations when you're a municipality.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the principal amount has to be higher. If I'm understanding correctly, this is 62% annual rate. If we're 100,000 in principal and
Why is
60,000.
the interest so high that first year?
The interest is so high because we were in at a 5% debt service schedule, and we were running it with an 14-month or 15-month payment schedule. So before you made your first interest payment or you made the whole interest payment, you were accruing like 15 months of interest and not 12 months of interest. Because what we were saying is you were going to be issuing debt yet in fiscal year 23 to be paid in fiscal year 24. Does that make sense? Like to be very honest, in March of 23, we thought we were going out for bids like very immediately. So when we did it, we had to set it up and say, well, what if we issued debt in April of 23, but we actually can't make a first principal and interest payments until 24. So now we had 3 to 4 months of accrued interest plus a whole 12 months of accrued interest.
Is there, is the $100,000 of principal payment not reflective of the $4.5 million bond issue that was?
No, it is. It is. So all you do, for our perspective for a pre-levy, this is the simplest way I can make this. We set up a debt service levy and say, this is our debt service schedule. This is what we're looking at. That 3.7 million, we say you can't make big payments in the first couple of years. You don't have the receipts to do it. If I did make a big payment, if I put a $230,000 principal payment in there, all of a sudden you would have a whopping debt service levy.
Isn't that the answer to your question? It's not $67,000 of interest on $100,000. It's
No,
$67,000
sorry, yes.
interest on 300.
Correct, on $3.7 million.
That's what I was getting
I'm
at,
sorry,
with the interest
yes.
is being calculated, not just on that one
No,
term.
I apologize. I was
It's on the
thinking
2-year,
we were.
it's on a 2-year note, the 3-year
It's-
note, the 5-year.
Correct. It's on
Okay.
everything because you're paying interest on everything. My apologies.
Yeah.
I misunderstood and was not following you there. So yes, you're paying it on not only the 100,000, but you're paying it on the $3.7 million
I'm with you
that you're
totally.
borrowing. It's just like a home loan. I mean, it's just like a car loan. It's a
I
home
was
loan.
in
It's
fixed
just like,
income for a few
Right.
years.
And it wasn't 3.7. At that point, it was assumed to be 4.5.
it was assumed to be 4.5 at that time. But here's what happens. So fiscal year 24 has wrapped up as of 18 days ago. And guess what? You have $162,000 sitting in the debt service fund. You can't touch that $162,000 until you issue a debt. And the first debt payment that you make has to use the $162,000. So what did we do this spring? We implemented a debt service levy for fiscal year 25 because we assume this payment is going to come. You've already set the tax rate on the $162,000. Like you've already set it in motion that there was going to be this tax rate. You raised the taxes already in 24. And I know we've talked about this, and I'm not sure everybody understands this. You raised the taxes in fiscal year 24 to pay for the fire station. We are not asking you to raise the taxes any more than the taxes you raised in fiscal year 24
And
to
same
pay
for
for the
25.
fire station. Same for 25.
Which
I believe-
That's 140.
122,000, 140. It is, it's 140, right. Yes, because this payment got smaller because we're looking at 3.5 and 3.7. So then what we do is we'll front load that. We'll make it a $110,000 payment or a $115,000 principal payment. So you've already set the tax rate. So when I say there's no more taxes to be levied over and above where your tax rate is today, I'm truly being honest to you. We don't anticipate that you need to levy any more taxes than what you're levying right now because this fire station has been built into your 24 budget and your 25 budget. And those dollars are there. I have a city who has levied for 3 years in anticipation of a very large street project, like a downtown street project, and it just kept getting pushed back. I mean, they would have a complication in figuring out where the mains and the stormwater runoff and this and that were gonna happen. And so our first payment on that debt is like $600,000 because we've got these 3 years of debt service money sitting there to be paid. And all that does is ultimately it helps lower the rest of the payments because we're kind of taking a bigger chunk off that first year. So you're
It's like a
actually
down
gonna be,
payment on a house.
yeah, you're gonna actually be making a bigger payment. You're gonna probably be making $170,000, $180,000 principal payment in year one, where we thought you were only gonna make $100,000, but you're gonna have these two sets of funds from 24 and 25 that we have to use. Bond counsel will say, Maggie, we have to know what Sandy's sitting on, what she expects to get based on her budget. We'll know that. And those are the monies that we have to use on that first debt payment in 25. So that talks a little bit about that. I want to talk a little bit also about the fire district funds of $40,000. So at $4.5 million, when we were looking at that debt schedule, and $4 million, we were looking at using $40,000 from the fire district every single year to make this debt payment. When you lower the amount, you get to sort of choose where you're going to use those funds. So in my mind, the TIF is available. We can use the TIF, so I just eliminated the fire funds. This was my thinking. Then you can use that $40,000 and say, we're going to use it for equipment. We're going to buy fire trucks. We're going to buy, oxygen packs, whatever we've got to buy with that extra $40,000. When we no longer need it, when the TIF is available in full in 4 years, we're going to just use TIF funds to pay back this project.
One of the problems with that is we are not in control of the fire district money.
No.
That's annually too. They have committed that for now, but they don't have to commit that every year.
But Jim, my understanding is that the fire district has committed $40,000 to this project. My question for Maggie that I wanted her to address was, if we don't attribute that to this fire station project every year, which is these new debt schedules kind of pulled it out, the fire district money has to be spent on the fire department.
Yeah,
So this is a very clean way to use those
Correct.
funds.
but they don't have to collect and give us that $40,000 every year.
But that they have committed to
But
doing that, Jim. I don't want to,
yeah,
give
you've
anybody the
committed,
impression
right.
that that's not.
I would assume that they're giving the money. If they've already committed, they're giving the money.
And so I
Right.
didn't, what I was.
That's what I understood from all those conversations in the fire department, that they were.
My concern was that it's not Jim, to your point, it is not our call. They have committed to the fire station project.
Right.
I think we would have to talk to them about whether they would like it to be.
Yeah, well, that's their decision that they make every year.
And
The
that's
county
okay.
board is a small board there,
But
and they can make that commitment
Let
every
me
year.
remind
They can
everybody,
change it.
you issue a general obligation debt every single year at budget time.
Right.
You get to sit down and decide where the money is going to come from for that. I am not telling you to property tax levy. You can property tax levy the whole debt. You have every right and ability to do that. But if the fire district says, we want our $40,000 to go towards the fire station, put the $40,000 a year in the budget that it's going to go towards the fire station, and then all that does is reduce the TIF.
So
It reduces the other source of revenue that you're coming up with.
So my question is, what happens to the rest of the TIF? So if we don't need the 40,000 to
Yeah.
make the debt payment
Then
anymore.
if you're not collecting that 40,000, because you do not have an obligation for that 40,000, it just rolls back into the city, the county, and the school. And everybody gets their
So it
third
might not
of
be.
the valuation that the 40,000 makes
Which
up.
is why you looked at it and said, hey, you have TIF. Let's use the 40,000 that the fire district wants to support the fire department in other ways, because the fire department certainly has other needs.
Right.
And we heard about those.
Right.
So use TIF because you have TIF, make the
Yes.
payments with TIF.
Because I can tell you this, bond council is not going to justify you going out and borrowing money for a fire truck and using TIF funds to pay for it.
Right.
So I'd rather you use the TIF to pay for the fire station and ask the fire district, hey, if we buy a new fire truck, can we take your 40,000 a year and use it on a payment for the fire truck, right? Because that's still fire-related equipment.
Right.
That's benefiting you, the fire district, as well.
That's helpful for me,
Yeah,
at least to understand why
so-
you would make a decision. one
Right.
way or the other.
And again, that's a decision that we get to make every single year when you do it. And again, something could come up, right? There could be something you truly need that $40,000 for, different than, if you do not need the TIF. Sandy and I also talked about this on the phone. If for some reason you say, well, we're going to still use the 40,000 a year, that's going to eliminate the 40,000 out of the TIF that we need to collect for this. You can, again, turn that TIF back over and reduce your asking from 518 to, 480, and eliminate the $40,000 in the future. But if you have other projects that could be eligible for TIF, then you could potentially enter into new obligations. I mean, I hate to say this, but you have to have obligations to be able to ask for TIF. My job is to get you obligations, right? Is to issue obligations for you. That is what I do, but you truly have to have an obligation to be able to collect TIF. The other thing I want to talk about with TIF is I don't want anyone to think about TIF for this fire station against new development TIF. The fire station TIF, the $518,000 that we're talking about, is TIF money that's already there. It's increment that's been in your system. It's growing potentially in your system. Likely it's growing. I mean, how old is your new Dollar General out here?
Year and a half.
So the Dollar General hasn't even hit the tax rolls yet.
It just hit.
The tax rolls this year. 23 or 24.
Yeah, it hit the rolls and it was like huge, if it wasn't.
47%
In-
in commercial.
In 24, it hits the
Or
rolls.
25. Well, I showed
26.
it in 25.
Oh,
What
it's
Dollar,
really- okay.
what Dollar General has shown is that we desperately need commercial here.
Mhm.
I
Actually
mean,
did.
the sheer
DJ?
volume of money
Singing the
That
preacher
one
choir here.
store.
Yeah, I mean, totally.
that people bitch
Right.
about for all
Right.
years.
And.
Not only that, we're also getting the, Ella loss from there too that we didn't
Yeah.
have.
You're getting a loss. You're right. There's a bump in your.
There's a
your-
major
because
bump
there's
in
that
our
commercial,
losses.
there's that
We didn't have-
retail. That people are paying on. It's not my grocery
That's
store
almost doubling
or my
our
convenience
loss.
or food. It's, yeah.
Correct. And
Correct.
it really
So,
is.
but I don't want to confuse the fact. I want to make sure that everybody, because we get a lot of questions about this. Well, we can't TIF for a rebate agreement for commercial, industrial, housing, because we've already committed this 500. It has nothing to do with that. That 500 is there, it's been there. A new development should stand alone on itself. If you're going to offer a rebate agreement to a developer, it needs to stand on its own two legs. In my opinion, no matter what. If you're gonna offer, it should really be going on the parcel itself. It could be part of the TIF district or a new TIF district, but it really needs to stand alone and say, I want you to rebate me back these dollars off my tax dollars, and that is new increment. Bond council will not treat it any other way, that it needs to stand alone. Housing areas do get built and they stand alone on their own.
As I
because of
say,
the
for
10 years.
council, I mean, that was actually more, so we've talked about fire station and bonding and being paid for TIF a few times even since I've been here. So what prompted tonight was that we do have a developer who's doing a building in town, once, has, 17 lots. Once is ready to come to the city and ask for that tax rebate in
Yep.
order to pay for the development itself. Streets and roads and, utilities and
Yep.
the things it costs.
Yeah.
To buy down the cost of
Yeah.
that development.
Yeah, and in housing, that's the only dollars that you can spend. You can only spend TIF dollars on infrastructure in housing. Streets, water, sewer, curb, gutter, sidewalks. That's all you can spend on. Commercial, Dollar General could have said, we need a turn lane off of your main drag, and we want you to rebate us back on the turn lane. You could be like, sure. Or they could just say, we're gonna build a parking lot, and you need to rebate us back on that parking lot cost. Sure, you can do it. Commercial and industrial, you basically can give them money for anything. But in housing, you can only give them money for infrastructure. You can't even give them money. They have to prove up to the city, like, this was our land development cost, and then this is the public infrastructure right-of-way cost.
I mean, that
So-
makes sense.
Yeah, land development, you can't pay for them to buy the land, you can't pay for them to grade the land. You really can't even pay for them to put in the water and sewer to the house. It's public infrastructure, which is the
They've
curb
gotta
stop.
have their.
Correct.
Yeah.
But we know that public infrastructure is very expensive.
And we want them to meet our standards,
Correct.
which means
Correct.
we want them to pay more than they probably would pay if it was just them building wherever they wanted to build.
Correct.
So we're contributing, or we want to participate in that.
Right. And I will always be a proponent of the rebate. Why? They have to perform before you have to perform. A rebate agreement is the safest way for a city to give an incentive. They have to build something, that new building or those new houses have to pay their taxes, and then you rebate it back. Now, we get this question asked a lot of times. Well, why don't we rebate back to the individual homeowners? Because they are not the one who took on the risk. The risk was the developer putting in the public infrastructure, building the development and hoping that these lots sell out.
And being a rebate, then we also have that step of inspection. It has to meet our standards before we issue the
Absolutely.
rebate, you know. Whereas
Absolutely.
if it's upfront, then it really gives us total control.
It does.
Driver's seat.
But a rebate is the safest way for you to
Sure.
incentivize. We have some cities that are like, no, we're gonna give them cash up front, and that just like makes my skin crawl, because you don't know where the market could turn, you don't know that they weren't gonna walk away from the project, and you have no way of sometimes getting those dollars back. So, and never realizing that, and getting that growth. We had one community years ago, in 2007, the community bought land. You, the city, should not be a developer. That's my 2 cents on that. That is not your job. You are to plow their streets and pick up their trash and mow the parks. So the city bought land, city put in all the infrastructure and said, we're gonna sell these lots. And we're gonna collect the money off of these new lots to pay our debt back. That was the fall of 2007. And all of a sudden, we go into a global financial crisis and no one is building new houses. So they have stuck $2 million into this project and they were getting nothing in return for it. And it was 6 years before they had like a first house out there. So in housing, and not to confuse everybody, but in housing, you can ask for a 5-year extension, but it has to be approved by the school district and the county. So this community went to their school district and their county and said, here's the situation. We started this TIF area, we're 6 years into the TIF area, nothing has happened. No evaluation to show, can we get the 5-year extension? And they said, sure.
On the 10 years.
On the 10 years, so it went to 15 years, and we are literally ending the 15 years, and they are going to break even by $250 in total. Like, I mean, $2 million, and to only break even by $250 is not, that's cutting it way too close. So they entered into a new agreement with a developer who's going to develop the second phase of this project, and they're only giving them rebate agreements, and that makes me very happy that, you know, again, that house has to build. So you don't rebate back to the individual homeowner, you rebate back to the developer, because they're the ones who had to make that development happen. So, other questions? Housing?
I mean, I just would add to that savings should flow through to the prospective buyer.
Well, I think
Right,
it's the but-for test. I think what you hear from a developer is that they would not be able to sell that lot and that house, you know, if not buying down those costs.
Correct, the lot price would be more expensive.
That's what I'm getting at. It turns
exceed
from being an
mine.
$80,000 lot into a
Yes.
$55,000 or
Correct.
$70,000.
Absolutely. I
And
don't
it is
disagree with you.
literally untenable.
And so in that, the prospective homeowner does share in a way with.
Mhm. Yeah.
So can you, why do cities, I know you just explained it when you started, the 100% isn't really 100%, you know, because of the LMI. And then also schools, right? You know, but it is essentially outside of LMI, the 100% of what the city would gain on that additional increment. Why do you go with 100% up to an amount versus 80%? Why do cities choose one or the other?
Yeah, so typically in a commercial or industrial TIF, we see them choosing less than 100%. And the reason is we all know commercial and industrial is taxed at 90%. It's not taxed at 45, 46% as it is in fiscal year 25. So when I build my home, I want you to work through the value with me. I build a $100,000 home. You know, I'm going to do easy math for you here. Building a $100,000 home. First of all, my home is only worth $46,000 in the taxable eyes. I'm only going to be taxed as this fiscal year on 46% of that home value. I'm only paying taxes on $46,000. So I've eliminated a whole lot of tax, where my commercial $100,000 building is now paying on $90,000 of its value instead of my 46. So most communities say, well, you know, they're paying more value, and so there's a lot more value coming in on a commercial property. We can lower our kickback to them. We can lower that rebate back to them because they're actually paying a whole lot, and we need to really justify how much we want to rebate back to them. It is fairly common if we have a TIF area for housing that is around the 15 home mark, and depending on what infrastructure is needed, if it is all sewer, water, streets, it is very common that the developer will never see all 100% of their costs coming back to them.
Their cost that they show us if for just public infrastructure is gonna exceed.
Way exceed what you can give them
100%.
at 100% of what you can give them. Because remember, 100% of what you can give them is only
60.
here, 62.49%. Because it's a $100,000 home, we roll it back to 46, we pay taxes on 46,000. So instead of, 90,000 of taxes, we're paying on 46,000 of taxes. Every home, on probably a $350,000 home, that's gonna be like $6,000. And now the $6,000, LMI is 37.5% of that. So now you're into like the $3,500 to $4,000 range is all you collect off of that one house. And if only one house built in year one, that's year one, right? The other thing is commercial property comes on at one time. It's one building, it's all there, the value's there. A housing district is this home gets built, this home gets built, this home, and they may not all get built in 1 year. It'd be great if they got built in 1 year, but likely in 17 houses, they're probably getting built over a 3 to 4 year period.
And then I don't want it to go unspoken that the real benefit of this is you've made housing affordable, the market rate of that new housing affordable to a certain, still market rate.
Correct.
But the expense of infrastructure, public infrastructure is so much that we're making sure that that is being paid for with the increment. And then once that's done, we have all that valuation.
Correct.
I mean, I don't want to,
Correct.
we all know that.
You
but
get that valuation in
that's
your debt service
literally why
right
you're
away. Right.
So that in 10 years,
Correct.
or whenever this
Yep.
obligation is done,
Yep.
we get.
You're done, right? That valuation flows into your budget and you should be able to see an increase in your budget.
And like what I think the city of Atkins has done through all this growth, is this role.
Mhm.
As you should be doing this on a regular basis to keep the growth of the community continuing so that you can afford to TIF this.
Yeah.
You don't need this today, not that you get it anyway, because they probably wouldn't build it if you didn't give it to them.
Yeah.
But then when that one rolls off, you get another one, you get
Yeah.
another one.
Again, it's your obligation and only your obligation to incentivize growth in your community. School district can't offer TIF rebates, county can't come into your city limits and offer TIF rebates. It's up to you to make it happen. Do 17 houses bring 10 new children to the school? Maybe. Do 17 houses free up other housing opportunities that somebody maybe moves out of a house that they already own in Atkins, moves into a new bigger house, and that frees up maybe a lower valued home, a starter home, and does that bring somebody else to your community? Maybe. 17 new houses is 17 new utility bills paid. It's 17 new collections of water, it's 17 new collections of sewer. It's all those things that start to add up across the board in that first 10 years, and then it's that valuation coming on after that 10
And the
years.
other piece that the council's gonna probably face soon, as Councilmember Bella mentioned, commercial, right? So we have commercial and available for sale. We have someone interested in developing that. And one of the barriers that we've heard to building on those commercial lots is rooftops, is population. That, at 2,000 population, we attract a certain amount of commercial, but 3,000, 4,000 population attracts more. I asked about, the Quick Star, the Pizza Ranch, where the things you see in small
What do
communities,
you have to have?
and they each have a number. Every single one of them has a number of population or drive-by, and every housing unit is gonna add to that head count.
Right.
The negative is we have to keep watching our infrastructure. 17 more houses is 17 more water bills to pay, but it's also a lot of gallons that we have to provide and make sure we have the
Correct.
water and sewer
Yeah.
capacity
Yeah.
to deal with that.
Absolutely.
Which we're not too bad right now.
Right.
We're really running tight on some of our.
Do we have a capacity analysis? Is that something Snyder provides for
I
us?
thought we got one last fall, didn't
Likely that's something they can provide you if they
I
have
don't
to.
think he's ever, it was something we asked, I don't know if he's ever done a presentation.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that was one of the questions that was asked actually by when the
Was it
residents.
not what, because Nick sent me the presentation he gave to you last October.
But there was a very
Was that not-
specific question about the capacity.
We aren't,
We haven't got.
we aren't anywhere close right now with our water, so our sewers over like 30-40%.
Because that's.
We've
what
got
we're
on
talking
it.
about.
Our next
People
problem is
want
going to be our 24-hour
This is all
storage.
temporary solve.
We have the capacity to provide the water with our pumping and our tower.
Biggest thing is
but-
pressure.
Based on our water usage, we have a 24-hour capacity reservoir that we have to maintain. And that we're running close to on that, but that's going to be the next thing before we have to add towers or pumping stations. We have to maintain that capacity.
Yeah.
Right now, we've got storage underneath of the sewer plant out there, but that, again, another tank, which right now we're really would, if we put another water tower in and properly place that, it would solve some of our pressure problems.
But I'll tell you that 17 new houses also spreads the new debt again amongst 17 more houses,
Yeah.
right? It not only brings, but when you have 17 new houses, they start to pay in on whatever these water and sewer improvements have to be as well, because they're gonna pay it through their water bill, their sewer bill, if we have to start talking about raising rates in the water and or the sewer, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Yeah, the capital improvement plan is the only thing I've seen, and that doesn't touch on capacity. It's a prioritized list of things that need to get done, but I guess it doesn't.
Oh.
So I'd be interested, if I need to follow up directly, I will, but
No, I
It was a
can
question,
ask.
Nick,
Because
that, you know,
he sent me a presentation that he made
So-
to council last fall, and I thought it was all of that, but you don't think it's.
I don't think
Predated
it
me,
was, because that was a
so-
direct question people ask, and because it's the first thing that people ask is can we solve the pressure issue? So you get pressure, then the capacity, like, well, to get that's the number one thing that's asked.
The problem is we have a perceived pressure problem, but we meet state standards. And there are places out there where the water isn't what they want it to be. But again, it meets the state standards. And the developer was told that, and there were different ways, and the council has looked at different ways, but nobody's willing to fund that. So we are what we are. I unfortunately get kind of nasty, and I tell them that's the way the pressure was when we bought the house. Should have turned the water on first.
Yeah, but they're not gonna know that. That's realtors and stuff like that. Come on, nobody thinks of that stuff.
It's an assumption.
I bought a house 6 months ago, and they were like, oh, everything looks great, and I didn't replace the dishwasher, and guess what I did as I walked out of Waterloo today? Bought a brand new dishwasher.
It's like when I bought-
Because it's a crappy dishwasher.
It's like when I bought my house and I have an inclined, driveway with the ditch. You're looking at the house, but you don't see the ditch because I haven't mowed the ditch. The first time I mowed the ditch, I'm like, what the F? So it's like, you don't see that kind of, it's not like you walk in there, and it's not like your inspectors do that stuff. That's naive.
I've never shopped for a house carrying around a hose and sprinkler.
Yeah, but it's naive. Or there's certain things you just don't look at. I mean, just,
Are there any other questions?
that's where,
for me?
yeah.
The one other thing I want to touch on, and Sandy and I didn't talk about this, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I also don't want everyone to forget that there's an idea that we also should be issuing a $450,000
Thank you.
part of general obligation debt for street and water projects. Your water fund is in the negative, and part of that is because you have spent water funds that are technically not there, but why are they there, EJ? It's all sitting in one big bank account, right? You and I have talked at great length about this. On paper, it's financially split out in all these funds. At the bank, it's in one big bank account. So you've overspent the water fund. It is sitting at a negative balance. Part of that is for water projects. You did a reimbursement resolution. You've held the public hearings on it. We just need to issue the debt. And we always told you, don't issue the debt, don't spend the money this is what I get paid to do, but don't spend the money on my services until we're gonna issue this fire station debt. Let's just issue it as one thing. And as we've just discussed, that's just kind of lingered on and lingered on and lingered on. I think you need to issue the 450. The 450 is not a property tax levy at all. It will be paid half with water funds, and it will be paid half with local option sales tax, or all with local
So the
option
rate
sales
on
tax.
that is would be 4.5?
We don't know. We have to take it
I
at
just say
today's.
rates have started to trickle down.
They have started to trickle down. So I sold bonds yesterday at 3.77%.
So yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So this is an estimate. We had that estimate a couple of years ago, it was at 5%, because that's really where we were at. So we've started to bring that down. That'll be a negotiation of the day of sale interest rates, but that's what we're looking at. And so I'm just reminding you that as we're talking about this fire station, we likely will have a second series that we're asking you to do on that same official statement, same day of sale documents that says, this is the fire station, and then this was that water and street project. And again, we're not telling you you have to pay. Actually, I think we were using most of it from local option sales tax and just a very small amount from water, right? Under 10,000 a year from water, and the majority of it coming from local option
And
sales tax.
the reason I wanted her to make sure and emphasize this and bring you that schedule again is, as I know people are paying attention to the fire station debt, and I don't want anybody to think we did a bait switch with when it comes to debt issuance day, on bond sale day,
Right.
to go, I thought we were talking about 3 point something, where this other 5.
Yeah, where this other
from.
450
And
come
so
from.
we gotta keep it in the back of our mind, $450,000 was already spent in these other 2 areas. We need to pay ourselves back.
Correct.
And it is not on property taxes, so it doesn't have the same discussion that the.
Yeah, because I think you paid it from, I mean, the street and water projects, if I recall, were from water and from local option sales tax. So there's kind of a negative balance, not a negative balance, but your balance of local option sales tax isn't what it should be, because, and then that frees up that money to, again, spend it back and pay the debt off, but it gives you that money back so that you can reinvest it at 5% if you can get it. But you also have that money back so that it can be spent on other projects as time goes on as well. So
I have a question about the low to moderate income set aside. So that's 37.51%.
Yep.
How do we, can you give us some examples?
What do you
of-
spend it on? Is that your
Yeah, what do we
question?
spend it on? How do we
Perfect.
start that conversation? Do
Correct.
we as a council have to
Yep.
agree on
Great
a certain
question.
thing
Yeah.
or?
Great question. The low to moderate income, remember, it's not all gonna come in at one time, because in year one, maybe there's one house, and you're gonna get a couple $1,000s to the LMI fund. A lot of cities work with their local COGs, your Council of Governments, and they set up LMI programs, and here's why. Because to prove up that I'm a person who meets the LMI standard, I have to prove up that I meet the income level. No one, unfortunately, is gonna walk into City Hall and hand their tax return to Sandy and say, or anybody at the front desk, and say, here, look, I don't make that much money, and I wanna apply for these programs. So you set up with COG, they do they're like a third party, it goes on your website, there maybe is an application here, but nothing ever comes to the city. They fill that information out, they're analyzed by the COG and say, yes, they meet the LMI standards. You as a council get to decide how you're gonna spend those funds, and a lot of times, they are grant funds to these homeowners that meet these LMI standards, and the COG again sets up this program for you at very minimal. I mean, truly and honestly, they're getting a minimal fee for doing this, but they set this program up for you, and maybe you're giving grants to first-time home buyers, right? So we've got these 17 new houses, and maybe somebody moves out of their $150,000 house, and a mother with 3 kids who's on one income, she qualifies, let's say, and maybe you can give her $2,000 towards her closing costs or something like that. We see a lot of cities giving those grants for replacement of windows for energy efficiency, replacements of furnaces, air conditioners, hot water heaters, roofs. So it could be a grant program individually. I also mentioned you could say, well, this part of town is a very older part of town in the way that the houses are older, they're not high valued houses. And we think that there's a lot of older, retired, or low-income people living on this street, and we need to replace the water main down that street. Like, it would be best if, we have a project and we need to replace the water main, we need to replace sidewalks, whatever that is, you could go into that street, have those people send their income surveys into the COG. The COG could say 75% of the people living on that block that you're talking about meet the low to moderate income set aside, or meet the low to moderate income standard. And you could say, well, then if the project's $100,000, we're gonna take $75,000 out of the LMI fund and pay it. The problem is you just don't have those LMI funds like that, right? They build up over that 10-year period, but it is very important that you work with somebody, the COG or somebody, to set up an LMI program sooner than later in a rebate agreement, just so that when the time comes and there is money flowing in there, you can start to make those low to moderate income grants or do money to do other things.
And so my suggestion is that we bring ECOG in, same thing, bring them in, have a presentation and have them tell us what programs are they running for other communities,
Correct.
what communities are like us, and what programs, because we would absolutely want to do what she's having, have them run it, and I would prefer to see programs that have been successful somewhere, you know, because sometimes it's hard
So
to.
LMI funds don't have to go into the new development.
They most likely won't, because they have to serve LMI people, and LMI people
See,
are probably not the ones building the Florida
That's the
community.
negative when everybody's talking about LMI.
It's
They
community-wide.
keep saying that, well, that you're gonna put in just like these three there, that's LMI, but it really isn't because the taxes and everything are up there. It's only a short period. It's like for teachers, something like that. They're low income now, but they're going to have to be able to prove that they can pay the taxes on the full value, not what is forgiven. So
Typically, it's used in other parts of your community. It's very rarely.
Because you most likely would never amass enough money. The program we have now, and I told Maggie about our CDB GDR program, fantastic, but that is so unique.
Yeah.
Think about how much, because that CDBG federal money comes through because of natural disaster, each unit has $125,000 being attributed to it. The reality is, you're just not gonna have those kinds of dollars rolling
Right,
in all
right.
at one time.
Right.
I mean, that is,
Right.
yeah, so
Yeah,
it's not gonna look anything
Yeah,
like ours.
yeah.
one of the problems I have is whenever anybody says LMI, they think of housing projects.
Yeah.
Or
When we
apartment
have-
buildings and stuff like that,
You
and
know.
it doesn't have to go to that, and it's not in that
We
part,
won't
it
have
can
that
be used. It's money that has to be, but it can be used to, we've got water mains for 32.
So for my example, I always use Waterloo has a sidewalk replacement program. They come out, they look at the sidewalks that people have called in and said, this sidewalk's broken up, it hurts my walk, right? Like I trip over it. I'm older and I trip over this person's sidewalk. They come out at the beginning of the year, in the spring, they look at my sidewalk and they say, yep, your sidewalk's broken up, here's the deal. We can replace your sidewalk block, these 3 blocks for $750. Or you can pay somebody, but you gotta meet our standards. Like they can come out and do it if you can get it done for less than $750, great. What they do is they also ask the question, do you think you qualify for low to moderate income? And if you they hand you a little survey, if you turn the survey in and you think you qualify, then all of a sudden the city will come out and do your sidewalk replacement and they will take the funds from the LMI funds that have accumulated at the city of Waterloo for projects that they've done. So again, you're talking about a town of 70,000 people, they have a bigger mass, but that is one way that it's easy for them to spend the LMI funds in $750 blocks, saying you have to replace your sidewalk for the safety of the community, but if you meet the LMI standard, we're gonna replace it and not charge you to do it. Otherwise,
In the community measurements.
It does.
People walk. And
Correct.
and evaluation.
Correct. Sometimes it's not even your fault. The tree root has uprooted the sidewalk block that's still in front of your house, and we've got to replace it, is what our ordinance says, so. Yeah. Other questions? I've taken way more of your time than I thought I would this evening, so I apologize for that.
Thank you for your time.
That was.
All right.
what we talked about.
Perfect. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Maggie.
You're very
Really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Yeah, you guys have a good evening, have a great weekend. It is Friday Eve, I've been calling it all the Friday Eve. Here's my thing, it's been a week where everybody was on vacation the last 2 weeks. They all came back this week and needed something. So, it's been a week. Oh, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Maggie.
Do we need a motion to adjourn or can I just?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
7:57.
All opposed?
Maybe I can leave these too, if anybody else wants one or stops by, everyone's on, I'll just leave all of those.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.